Be fun, Alexander.
Okay. Alex is fine. That works. Yeah.
I'll go by
Matt or
Matt.
Matthew or
Matt's cool.
okay.
So it's good to meet you, Alex. It's finally nice to speak face to face.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe we should do some just quick introductions for people, for anybody who's watching or just whatever. So
Okay.
I'll start. So I sort of stumbled on the whole Jordan Peterson thing, Peterson thing a couple years ago, and then stumbled onto Paul, and have kind of then gone on to the Discord and just really been enjoying the intellectual journey of kind of picking things up. And so I guess my background is I grew up in a Christian home. I've always, I would always consider myself a Christian, but I mean, I had certain times where I kind of walked somewhat away from the faith. But then kind of recently with like the whole sort of intellectual journey, I've kind of really come back to things, and kind of dipping my toe in like Eastern Orthodoxy and kind of reading some of the church fathers, and just I mean that's kind of a whole new world for me, kind of coming from like a more like traditional evangelical type background. So yeah, and then I guess just for my work, I work as a drug and alcohol therapist. So yeah. So I just graduated from Pitt a couple months ago, and this is my first job in terms of like out of the master's program. So that's been quite interesting, doing that. So I think the whole like transformational and like the whole story side of Peterson has been very sort of salient to me, just because I'm working with people in helping them through transformations as best I can. So like the whole like religious side of things of Peterson has obviously been super interesting in me, but also like more of kind of the pure like the more the psychologist side of him has also been very interesting, just because I've picked up so much from him. It's been amazing. So yeah, that's a super brief intro. I don't know, whatever, do you want to bounce off that or?
Sure. He is a living textbook in so many ways, and writing his own. My name's Matt Allison. I talked to Paul a few months back. I'm a writer, and I live in Grover Beach for now, California. I'm kind of a traveler. I grew up in Pierre, South Dakota, drove down a little bow to Lincoln, Nebraska, which was my slice of existentialism for 4 years. I like to call it my secular degree in how to get by. And then I came down the mountains to California, presumably to write screenplays for LA. But that didn't quite work out. I had a couple episodes and adventures, not on television, but I wrote with a buddy. And now I'm working on a novel with Cassidy.
Yeah.
And so that's been fun. It's very interesting to write with someone. It's kind of like having a conversation with someone. And it's like putting a microscope too. You know, when you go to the eye doctor, they put that thing over your face and then they click it. How's that look? It's like having that done over every thought you have, writing a novel with someone.
Right.
Is this clear enough? Is that sufficient ambiguity? Let's try another.
Which I'm sure can be frustrating, but also enlightening, because it's like, click. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Very
frustrating. Yeah. A frustrating enlightenment. Or an enlightening frustration. So yeah, it's I find it very, so you mentioned Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I came to him indirectly through, I don't know where, something that the algorithm on YouTube recommended. Yeah. And I was struck by how earnest he was in talking about Disney movies.
Pinocchio, The Lion King. For me, he brought those stories to life. It's like, wait, this is all this behind this that it's like a whole world I had never seen. I mean, I'd heard of archetypes like in passing, but I was like, oh, okay. There's a lot. There's a lot. Like there's a whole this whole substrata that I just haven't even been mining or even really thinking of, and that was something else.
I think that's a great phrase for it, substrata. Yes, that's what drew me to him as well. It wasn't the fact that it was a Disney movie, but what he was able to do with the still frames and how he was able to point to ideas with image.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the long run, that's what made me swoon for orthodoxy.
Yes.
Was it seems to accomplish this marriage of image or icon and profession, creed. Now, it's not perfect, just as my heart isn't perfect towards it. Depending on the day of week, I consider myself evangelical, and other days orthodox, and most of the time right in between. But I think all three places are pride for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out a way to be a novelist, but also traditional, and I don't. Categories have to go out the window. So it'll be interesting to me where we take this conversation in terms of the still frames we look at, right? Silence and the Joker, especially from your vantage point with your background in psychology and your focus.
Right.
So what maybe, I know recently you said before we started recording that you had seen the Joker.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to tie that in with what you've been dreaming and thinking in terms of your own profession, and we'll take it from there.
Right. I mean, so the Joker has obviously been very kind of like a lightning rod for a lot of criticism, kind of both ways. I think what the impression that I came away with it after first watching it was just like a very, very deep sadness, because it was really a testimony to, like, you know, a lack of logos, or just a lack of love, because you see this Arthur Fleck character. Let me turn this light on real quick. You know, he's rejected by all the societal struts have kind of been pulled out. Like, you see that scene with the social worker, you know, the fighting's cut, then he's on that scene with the bus, and that little spark of joy from the child. You see that interaction, but then it's like cut short by his mother, and then, you know, he finds out his relationship with his mother, who supposedly he thought took care of her, you know, turns out to be a lie, and just every thing after thing after thing. Just his whole worldview, his whole, like, you know, I guess symbolically, let's just, you know, the great mother society just completely pulled out from under him. And I noticed in, like, one of the I think it's when him and his mother are watching TV, like, you see the crucifix on the wall behind them. So it's like, even like just all like vestiges of religion, everything has been completely wiped out, and then he sort of falls into this, like, there's just nothing left, and that's sort of when and then of course you have that, like, sort of like the mini resurrection scene and everything at the end. But
I want to definitely talk about that, because I'm not sure it was a resurrection from my cheap seat.
Okay. That'd be interesting to get your thoughts on. But I mean, yeah, in terms of, like, because I see that pattern playing out in, like, a lot of my clients, is that they oftentimes tend to be very isolated. So they don't have any friends, they don't really have any supports. And I mean, I know Paul has talked about this before, like, even if you're just looking at the sort of the like religion from a cultural, like, sort of a sociological perspective, there's huge value there in terms of getting people in communities, and, you know, sort of outside of like a narrow interest. Because there was that like guy who had been he had converted from Islam to atheism that Paul talked with recently. And he was talking with somebody, saying like, oh man, people should just like, atheists should just get together and like, people should just center around communities around things they like or whatever. But what I've noticed, like even in myself or other people, is like, because we're so saturated in just completely, or like entertainment has just so completely kind of taken over our world. It's not the kind of it's not the sort of the participative culture that Jonathan Peugeot talks about. It's more of like just the passive, like interacting with the screen. That has become so powerful that we don't realize how much of a pull that has, even if like in theory, people know they should go out and do things, or go to a book club or whatever it is. That everything has just completely kind of fallen apart. So I saw in the movie, I saw like there was no sort of like he had no metaphysical religious structure, or even something he could kind of frame his suffering. It was just suffering as such. And then all the cultural supports and all his friends, like everything just turned out to be sort of a complete farce. So it was like just I can think of a good metaphor. It was like he was on stage and then suddenly, like I don't know, just everything was pulled from him. But I think what was so tragic is that like any little bit of love could have prevented that. It was sort of the story of like I think Lucas said this, like, he saw Joker as a warning of like if we continue to progress down this path of sort of the tribalism that we see, and that fracturing that we see in society today, like that is a world without logos, because there is, like, love is what holds things together, and without that, from like the smallest, or from the most minuscule level of analysis, like to the highest, it's just a world that completely fell apart. That was just my initial thoughts on that. But I've been trying to puzzle through how that relates to silence in terms of because you see in silence, you see sort of the priests coming into Japan and sort of almost in this like colonial type way, like they kind of want to convert these very primitive Japanese people, and then they're amazed at the peasants' faith, and that kind of leads me into like there's all this talk of like propositional knowing and all kinds of Vervaekian like truths, but ultimately, like in some sense, and this sort of kind of leads back to Kierkegaard and despair and all that, is like ultimately,
what did you say, Kierkegaard?
Yes. Ultimately, sort of at the core of all things is this despair, where it's like we can't. Ultimately, it is paradox, and it is, but ultimately, like the only rescue we have is Christ, but also it's sort of playing off of like what matters. Is it your actions and or is it what you say and profess? But I mean, I think ultimately for things to be true, it has to be both. Like your life, your prayer life has to match your, like how you live. You have to bring those things into alignment. Like even if you're looking at it psychologically, like you're trying to bring your your thoughts in alignment with what does Peterson say? I think it's thoughts in alignment with how you act. So yeah, that's I know like that's a lot to throw at you, but that's kind of what came up at first.
I appreciate the gestalt.
Yes.
Good. It's good. We have a buffet now to eat from.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
it's a testament to the depth of the films.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk for hours about it. One thing I want to touch on that you brought up that I find very salient in my own life is the relationship between, as you said, the propositional and the active. But I would like to reframe it as, since these are movies, let's talk about it in terms of perhaps goal and desire.
Okay.
Every film seems to have a goal, and the character isn't a character unless they have desire.
Mm-hmm.
What's the relationship between desire and goal? I really do think, I'm trying not to just be a cheerleader for orthodoxy,
Right.
but so partly this is my enthusiasm, but I do think this is true. I define truth as what is true always and under all circumstances. And that's very few things. It's not everything. But desire is just a secular word or a fancy word for faith. Because I think substrate-wise, faith is what motivates us. And it's more or less synonymous with desire. Because a desire is for something in the future, even if it's 5 minutes around the corner, a phone call away. And what perpetuates that? What gives that thing looking towards the future wings to get there? I think it's the old-fashioned notion of faith. So the old question of Hollywood, how do we get their attention? We'll give that character a desire that's not met till the end. I think is parallel with human being. What is it like to live in absolute relation with God is another way of asking, how do we give someone a faith big enough to humble them enough to live in relation to the future instead of the past? Because even the Israelites, as they were going through the desert, remembering their tradition and culture and where they came from, a la Egypt, but before that, Abraham, were moving forward to a promised land. So I think inevitably we have this directionality, and this is probably where Peterson comes in, towards the unknown. In time, we speak of that as the future, but what drives us there is always faith. Now, to the point of silence, faith can be deconstructed. Faith can be a hindrance. And as Kanye would say, now I'm losing my Christian scorecard. But what could that possibly mean? Faith could be a hindrance. I don't know.
So you said Kanye said that, or that's what you're
Yeah,
saying?
he didn't say faith could be a hindrance. I said that, but he said, I'm going to lose my Christian scorecard, and then he started cursing and using vulgarities. But I guess in a sense to say faith could be a hindrance is a massive vulgarity.
Well, I mean, I think if your faith is a hindrance, if your faith is in like a lesser good, I guess it could be a hindrance. Because like,
wow,
you're right, because ultimately, I mean, idolatry is seeking a lower good as a substitute for the higher, but then in that process you lose both. You lose the highest and you lose the lowest. But yeah, how that relates to silence,
or generally to living.
I mean, right.
I don't want to go all John Calvin on us, but my heart is an idol-making factory.
Right.
It spins out widget after idolizing widget.
Right.
Or idolized widget.
Yeah.
And I yo-yo from sincere faith to a kind of proud of my own bootstrapping faith. Because man, I can make molehills mountains.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not even talking about anxiety. I'm talking about grandiosity. Believe all things, hope all things. Yes, Paul, give me more. Ladle up that encouragement. I'll run with it.
Right.
But I think there's a way to misread.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Which, yeah, I guess kind of leads into like again that performative contradiction that he talks about is like, sort of. I guess that would be sort of like what you were saying with Paul, like sort of like the how for Kierkegaard, like religion had been appropriated by culture, and like people just turned. I mean, God, whatever like God in people's conception was something that they ran to in times of distress, versus I mean that's yeah versus it's so hard to put words around this stuff. Gosh, uh, versus that.
It is difficult.
Yeah.
It is difficult. And it's like writing a book. It's difficult.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure you would know. I guess maybe
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not trying to say I know.
Right.
I'm using the one thing that's my touchstone.
You want to
You have yours.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. How does because I guess maybe this is a little bit off topic from Silence and Joker, but how does because I've sort of been dipping my toe in or like Orthodoxy as well. Although right now I would consider myself more of like an Anglican, because that's just where I am. But how like because the whole concept of icons and like praying with icons and that's a whole new world for me. But I think because in the past when I thought of like an icon or an idol or something, I think my focus was like much narrower. But I think in some ways like because icon is something that we see through. So so like I mean like a worldview or an ideology or almost anything can be some sort of an icon, and that is inherently moral because our icons or our there's sort of an interpenetrating relationship between us and the world, and we're constantly being informed by how we look at that world, which is like why if you go into a conversation or you go into a meeting or something like or go into a relationship like just looking to manipulate and what can I get out of it, it's you that completely destroys it because it like but it destroys yourself because you're really just looking like there's a verse in the Psalms. Barfield talks about this in his book where it's I should have written it down before this conversation. Like, for those who look at idols, they will think like they will be shaped onto them. So it's like the way that if you look at the world in sort of like as a landscape of as a landscape of possibility for you to manipulate to your own liking, like whether that's on a individual scale or like a corporate scale, because we see that like a lot of the ecological stuff that we have going on. Because there's been like I guess I'm wondering how with the sort of the loss of the enchanted world that we've seen since the Enlightenment, or I guess maybe before then, how that's going to play out, and I guess what role icons. I don't know that this is sort of like unformed thoughts here.
Oh, it's coming through clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great, man. It's juicy stuff. The let me get up there with you on the saddle or on the that covered wagon, because that's all I know from the Midwest, and we'll go forward into this westward expansion,
right? Because
indeed it does typify the West to try to stand on the pinnacle of all things. I think that's one of our idols. as a mass civilization is the uppermost point, the tip of the pyramid, the iceberg. That's what we love. We love thinking that we've come to the brink. That works both ways. It cuts both ways. You know, the peak of civilization, we're at the moon first. And also, we are at the lowest point of mental health possible.
Yeah.
It's the same, that inversion comes from the same faith in our own grandiosity. It's a kind of a whack, like a wacky humanism without God, in my own opinion. So where do icons fit in with that in orthodoxy generally? I have no idea, but let's talk about it. Because I want to go back to faith can be a hindrance. And I think along the way, we're going to find out different ways to tie that bow. Because ultimately, faith isn't the hindrance. It's what we run with, and it's what we run toward, because Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith.
Right.
But there can be bad faith, as Jean-Paul Sartre said in the middle of the 20th century. And then there can be the double movement that redeems faith. And I love that phrase, the double movement of faith. I got it from Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
I think he gave the church the algebra of the movement. And let's see what you do with this. So it's basic, it's two moves, but it's very profound. The first movement of faith, which almost everybody makes, in fact, you have to make to get by. And it's a timeless move. So it happened when the cavemen discovered fire, and it's happening now as we're trying to figure out how to articulate ourselves to ourselves. The movement of resignation. This is the good sacrifice of Abel, which was, from almost all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from Cain's sacrifice at the level of appearances. Because when you resign yourself, you're in the mode of giving up. Oh, they said no. Oh, they went back at it again to that old dirty well. Well, what can you expect? You don't expect rye bread from wheat. So you've given up possibility in this concretization of the real in the present moment. I'm talking to the person, I have desires, I want things to come out of their mouth, they don't, I'm accepting it, I'm concretizing the moment, this is what it is, it's not anything else. I've given up possibility. And Kierkegaard's phrase for that possibility given up is the infinite. In other words, you're giving up God to come in, and who is God? He's the one for whom all things are possible. Right. You're giving that up. And now to adopt that as a mode of life is to live in resignation. And the worst case, to live as a reserved person. In Kierkegaard's terminology that he got from The Sickness Unto Death, a very good book. I think The Joker is a case study of the reserved individual who is trapped in infinite resignation. Now, the second movement is the double movement. And I think this is where the enchanted world can come in as a healing balm for the community. Because it's easy to have enchanted worlds individually or in small niche packages. I mean, look at the Oculus Rift. Put it on. I'm in the Resident Evil world, right? I can shoot those zombies all night. I'm in it. When I take it off, I'll get sick and vomit because of the vertigo, because it hasn't, been formed from my nose. I used to work for Verizon, so I know these things, the ways they break down, but not altogether. But that's an enchanted world. And then you can go on Reddit afterwards and talk about your Oculus Rift experience with some people, avatars, they could be anywhere, that will agree with you or disagree with you in interesting ways. And then you can melt it with politics, and you're off to the races in terms of creating your worldview based on an Oculus Rift experience that you're connecting and constellating all these things in the world that have no bearing on life. So you're living in resignation, although it looks like you're having a hell of a time. We can do that all the time. Like I do it with writing books. In a certain way, I give up the possibility of a lived life when I sit down to write fiction. That's resignation. It's me being reserved. Now, it doesn't have to be that, but sometimes it is. And I think that's sin. And we can do that with faith. I believe in God. Like the movie Silence, I believe so much that when these people are tortured and burned in front of me, I will hold on and not be an apostate because I have faith. Here's the movement he made. He saw, so he was in that cage and he was looking out at the Chinese, and they were having hot boiling water poured over their eyes. And before they turned the cup to the eyes, the man said to the guy behind the Garfield guy, the actor behind the bars, if you just recant the gospel and step on Jesus's face, the icon, if you make that symbolic gesture, we'll untie them and they'll walk free. But because he hadn't went beyond the movement of resignation, the first movement, all he could say was, I can't leave my God. But internally, psychologically, I claim, this is the movement he made, and this is the enchanted world. I think this is the faith that motivates us to move towards the future. It's what gives life its zest. Nobody could see it, and not even him himself. I think it was at the level of subconscious. But here's the movement he made as he was looking at those people tied up, about to make his ethical or moral decision. So it ties in with ethics.
Right, yeah.
All right, God. He was having a conversation with his God, his moral arbiter of that moment. And we all do this in so many different ways. This is what gives us, a soul. All right, God. What I see is they're tied up against the pole. And I'm told that they will have hot water poured over their eyes. Very hot water. That's the finite facts presented to me. What will you do? He's opening the door to the infinite. This is where he can make faith active. And what is his answer? Silence. Theme of the movie. Why is it silence? Because he hadn't made the second movement. So because he was stuck in the first, what he heard was, they will have hot water poured over their eyes, but someday they shall see again. Because Jesus can spit on mud and make eyeballs. What you're seeing, therefore, he psychologized it. His choice to not give up, his pride of he's a true believer, he's a priest.
So
that's his status. So he reverse engineered his psychology to say, they will be given sight again. There is a resurrection. What I'm seeing isn't the whole story, and therefore I do not recant. And he gets to watch through the bars, through his tears, the consequences of his action. But because he hasn't made the second movement, he still believes somewhere way out there, they're going to be brought back, but not because of him. So he's given up the infinity to a future possibility known as the resurrection after the end of times. That's wicked, the movie claims. What do you make of that? I could be totally off kilter.
No, it's because the crow or the rooster crowed when he stepped on the image. Did you catch that?
At the very end.
Yeah. Oh. So you're saying that just make sure I get this straight, that he had made the double movement, or he hadn't when
he made the double move. In my opinion, he made the double movement at the end when he put his feet on the face of Jesus's icon. And my proof of that is, when does God finally speak? In the act of the double movement, when he comes up to that statue, step on my face.
Right. Oh, right.
And now, what is the double movement? The double movement in Fear and Trembling is Abraham's woken up one day. Hey, that son that you've worked all your life in faith for, it, and in a way it was resignation, because I'm 70 years old, God. I'm not going to have a kid. You're going to have a kid. Okay, maybe like I'll die and then you'll resurrect me and you'll give me an angel's body and I'll be so flourishing with my wife that a child is necessary and natural. Okay, I can believe in that fantasy. I could sit down and write books about that. I could sit under the tree and, profess all my beliefs with gospel hymns. I can be very evangelical about that. I could be very orthodox about that and pious. That's resignation, though. When you go underneath all those layers of identity, it's just resignation. He's given up infinity to a very remote, distinct, non-moral future after the end of times.
I see, yeah.
But when he finally got it, and he got the Son, and then I tell this story to myself as a way to understand the second movement of faith. And I'm trying not to be wedded to these two movements in this algebra. I really think it's a way forward. So God gives him this test. Why? I think it's to get him to the double movement and to know that's a possibility for his soul. So he says, the Son whom you love. And underneath that is a world of phraseology, right?
Yeah.
Why does he love him so much? Because he's the child of promise. Why is he the child of promise? Because this is the proof that his faith was worth something for all those years. With barren Sarah, your faith was worth something. Look at your son. Now God is saying, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love. God, how dare you remind me of these things? Take him to a mountain that I will show you. I'm not even giving you the benefit of foreknowledge. And sacrifice him. Because I'm God. So now the monotheist God gets to become a pagan God who's bloodthirsty. Really, God? Is that what all this was about? One could say. This is the beauty of Christianity. It always upends every narrative that we can think of.
Right.
And what Kierkegaard saw in that story was, as he was walking for those 3 days, not speaking a word to his son, not being overtly anxious, what was he doing that none of us can see, but we could praise forever? Why do we make him an icon to look through? It's because we want to get there. We want to get there.
Right.
When we look at sports, great Kobe Bryant's, Duncan, why do we look at them through a screen? Because we want to get there. So Abraham was walking with his son, and internally the movement he made was, and it's just as simple as this: well, I'm going to sacrifice my son. I'm going to give up the infinity of his development and his future and my joy as a father for this finite concretization of lowering the knife. I will sacrifice my son, but I might still get him back. Or I will sacrifice my son, but God might change his mind. Or I will sacrifice my son, but God will not let him stay dead. That second phrase is the double movement itself. It's being willing to do the faithful act, be obedient to God, to the infinite, to the highest value, while holding on to the infinite to make everything right. If all you hold on to, everything can be all right, but you don't act in obedience to the given command, what are you? You're like an amoeba, a Brownian dot floating through the water of thoughts.
Right.
But if you're just obedient, you're a law lover, and you'll never get to the spirit of the letter.
Right.
But to combine them in tension, in the paradox of lived experience, to go on that 3 days journey, repeating yourself, I will sacrifice my highest value, but God will bring it back to me because God is love. If God is reconciling all things to himself, it's impossible that I lose this good thing forever. And yet I will, without quivering, without shaking, raise the knife because God has commanded it. God has asked for it. If he would have wanted to lose his son, he would have done it in bad faith. But he loved his son with a passion we can't even imagine because that was the son of promise.
The only son that you love.
So he had to love him while he was holding the knife and bringing it down. The love had to be intense and pure in order for the paradox to work, in order for him to make the double movement.
Which is, because that brings two things up in terms of, So the what's the name of the priest in Silence? What's the main character's name? I forget.
By Andrew Garfield.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember his
Yeah,
name, but
whatever.
Andrew Garfield's character.
Yeah. Well, so Garfield, so tracking on your double movement, the thing that God was calling him to sacrifice, was it his, because like, so when the movie starts, you sort of see him like he's sort of on this mission, almost sort of this martyrdom mission to kind of prove his faith almost. So I'm thinking maybe at least in Silence, maybe some of that double movement, or what God's calling him to sacrifice, is that that self project of like, I'm going to prove that my faith by not apostatizing, even though these people are going to suffer for my like insistence on proving this to myself. Maybe is that sort of what?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Chinese had their reasons for martyring their people. I mean, they were being, remember that parable the leader gave of the 5 or 7 concubines and the house owner?
Yeah.
I mean, they were having this influx of various cultures and power plays to sweep away their bishops and knights. And one of those mighty rooks was the political ploys under the guise of Christianity that those priests were participating in when they came and said, believe or be damned to hell, right? Pagan, 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 believe, believe, believe. What's your language? How do I assimilate it into the Christian gospel? Your language is an accident. Learn the gospel. Very, very discourteous. Very discourteous.
Right, because you see that with Father Ferreira I guess not Ferreira, because that's the Garfields, but the guy like the priests are coming to see. He talks about how the Japanese people don't like their idea of God the Sun is the literal sun in the sky, and he's like, nothing grows here. You can't, and he essentially makes the case that you can't, like the Japanese, that Ferreira's work is going to be fruitless.
Oh, you mean there's not agreement on the Trinity?
What?
Sam's watching. What?
Huh? Oh man!
But we see how these things all play out in micro and macro.
Oh, definitely.
What are our propositions worth? Are they worth our sin? Because in a certain sense, pride always rushes to the battlefield.
Vainglory.
Vainglory. Like there are a lot of things I want to defend, but I don't think I'm the person to defend them 99.9% of the time.
Right. So you said you saw Joker as he was stuck in the first movement, right? He was completely.
I think so, because he turned himself into a revenge tragedy character at the end. And I look at him. By the way, Sam, I love you. That was a joke to bring in the Trinity here.
Yeah. Love you, Sam.
Because he's been very active on the Discord, and I've been loving following his conversation with the others and the development of the whole Trinitarian. I like what he said before I go any further. Just recently, like yesterday, how, and I think this is true, the language of Trinitarian theology has become stale. People just use the words as platitude. It's not in faith or of faith, for faith. So it's stale. And I think he's right to call people out on that. It's very helpful both ways. So it's good. Yeah. That's why I have some hope for democracy. Personally, there's a side of me that wants it all to become a monarchy again, but then another part of me that would miss the stakes that are in our conversations. Because if we were in a monarchy, there wouldn't be a lot of stakes to our conversation. We could have them till we're blue in the face, but in a democracy, conversations really matter. Probably too much, but they do matter.
Right.
Social networking matters in a democracy, and all that politicking, and matters endlessly. But anyway, so the Joker, he's this knight of infinite resignation throughout the movie. He's beaten by some children. His sign is taken away. But what does he do on the ground? Starts laughing. He pushes that flower and water comes out. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that moment. Yeah.
I mean, it's the movement of infinite resignation. But in a way, maybe it's the movement of faith. It's up to the viewer to decide. It's either the first or the second. So he's had this concretization, thrown on the ground, beaten up, stolen, property stolen from him. And what does he do? And remember, I think, this is my opinion, anytime we talk about desire, we're actually talking about faith, no matter what. Because faith is what motivates. Desire is just a synonym for it. And whenever we talk about faith, we're talking about an absolute relation to the absolute God. So in that moment, he was doing the enchanted thing, lying on the ground, property taken, he was beaten. He was kind of like that person that Jesus talks about in the parable, who was beaten by some robbers on the way to Jericho. That's what that scene evokes, that icon evokes. And what's his conversation with God at that moment? In Hollywood terms, what's his desire? But what's his conversation with God at that moment? Though I've been beaten and the world is taking from me, that's my concretization. Yet I will believe in what? Goodness, joy, happiness. All of that is symbolized by the little squirting of the flower.
Right.
Maybe. Or this is all I've got left, and it's resignation. It's up to the witness, all of us who pass judgment, to decide. But I think he's acting in faith at that moment. It's why it's so poignant. The little,
right.
It's poetic. And that's why, I don't think poetry is a pastime. I think it is critical, just as STEM is critical, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I think there should be STEMP P, STEMPs or something like that, because there's got to be poetry. Because how else do people live with icons in this iconic world without the language of metaphor, allusion, internal rhyme, all these connections that are in plain sight in a poem?
Yeah, there's kind of just a flattening of, because poetry teaches you that's actually very interesting, because Barfield, I because in Saving the Appearances, I read that a while ago. He makes the point of the poets get there first, and the poets are because poetry sort of allows you in I don't know, it's related to myth somehow, because it pulls, I don't know, I got to think about that, but I've never thought about that before. So you would say that, so Arthur Fleck is, so he's in this paradox. So maybe maybe he's making the movement of faith, maybe he's in infinite resignation for most of the film. So when he finally smothers his mother and sort of falls, or maybe rises into this sort of archetype, or sort of this larger than life character of the Joker. That's, what do you think about that? Because
I see him as the way I like to think almost all my thoughts after comparison. So the Joker, for me, is rightly compared with Hamlet. And I think both can be analyzed under infinite resignation versus the double movement of faith, because both are overtly by their creator, Shakespeare and the director of The Joker, case studies of what motivates the human in us. You know, when are we going to feel most alive? That's what the movie The Joker's about. It's gonna, like when he's dancing, he shoots both men. He walks in the bathroom, the violins play, right? He starts doing that. Like, there was something in me turned on and evoked. Like something human, the deep in that called to my deep. But he just committed murder. So it wasn't the content per se, because it was immoral. And it was pathetic. He was dancing alone in a dirty bathroom as a man with paint and makeup all over him. Like, it was pathetic. And yet, deep called to deep. Why? Because all of that was stagecraft for this unseen, beyond the appearance, enchantment of the double movement that we all long for, because it brings us to God. Jesus was calling people to believe, right? It was, that's like, he did, like, he healed, yes, but he was like, your faith has made you well. And then he let them go and live their life after that experience. Hey, Luke.
Hey, what's up?
Sorry, guys. I totally spaced us.
No worries. We were just we were just getting to the end of Joker and the move of faith.
All right.
So I'll just go real quick on that before I lose my train of thought. So he's throughout this movie, like Hamlet. So Hamlet, what's Hamlet's problem? People typically say his problem is he thinks too much. But Nietzsche said he thought too well. And I agree with Nietzsche in the sense that here was a great case of this person who was supposed to fulfill a role. He's supposed to be a successor to the throne. He didn't get that. So what is he supposed to do on another level? He's supposed to take revenge. He's supposed to save his father from the belly of the whale and kill Polonius, or kill, not Polonius, that was a mistake, the uncle.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be his cog movement. But what did he do? He had the double movement of faith and made poetry out of observations. And he got out of his frame because he thought life was worth that much, at least. And that use of the dramatization of predestination and scripts and frames as a way to get out of it, I think was for Hamlet his Abrahamic move of, I will sacrifice my son, yet I will get him back because God is love. I am not just a thwarted king who's lost his father that will fulfill the rights of kingship by killing the one who's not in the throne. I will be a great stage actor. That was his way out. Now the Joker at the very end, he's going to kill himself and make himself a spectacle to everyone. He was planning it. He was sitting in the dressing room. He had his name picked out that everyone would remember him by. That was resignation. That was his concretization. If he would have had faith, if he would have been motivated, he would have forgiven them all, I claim, on television, and accepted the most heinous act of laughing at him, spitting at him possible. Because he would have said in his heart to God, though the whole world hate me, yet it's still good because you made it your love. And so I will bend a knee. But instead, what did he do? He couldn't even be a knight of infinite resignation. He became Hamlet's bad story, the old play, where he's just a blood-hungry villain that Shakespeare rewrote. And so what does he do? He changes his mind and he says, you think you can do all this to the world and change it sociologically and you're going to get no kickback? Well, you get what you effing deserve, and shoots another man, his own uncle. There's no faith in that, I claim. But anyway. So I think it's a great, like, anti-Hamlet, anti-double movement of faith, stuck in resignation. And then where does resignation lead you to? Acting out some revenge tragedy. Luke, we were
Yeah,
comparing Silence and the Joker.
that's great. That's great. I'm just thinking through that.
Well, I don't want to have you guys necessarily repeat everything that you've already said about Silence and the Joker. Man, and I don't know that I have any thoughts off the top of my head. I'll have to, if this gets posted, I'll have to, or share it with me, and I'll have to rewatch it. But I don't know, or unless you have a very short cliff notes to trigger off anything I would say. What were the main takeaways you came away with? What were the main parallels or similarities or why? So maybe I would ask it this way, because these are two within the contemporary cinema. Those are two films that I find to be profoundly significant. And so why?
I mean, I think it kind of ties back to what Matt was saying, is like there's that element of like that element of mystery and faith in both of them. Like Pearson talks about how like when you see that gymnast like pushing the edge, and it just captivates you, and like people can't look away. I think that's what's on that's what's on display. At least it's like I mean, especially in Silence, but I think maybe the Joker, because maybe it's the antithesis of that, or maybe not. But yeah, it's that, I don't know, it's that thing that can't be named, that like that Matt was talking about. So when the Joker, he kills those two guys, those two boys in the subway, and he's just dancing, and it's this almost desperate cry of like trying to transform, or like trying to transform what happened into something. I wouldn't even say beautiful, because it was very, I mean, it was horrifying what had just happened. I don't know. Thoughts, Matt?
So the dancing thing I've been thinking a lot about, and I mean, I don't know how it relates to Silence, but how I've begun thinking about that, and I'm not sure if this is even technically right, because I mean, I haven't studied this in psychology a lot, but but when Peterson talks about, and he has talked about before, like animus possession, what the dancing almost signifies to me, and you see a progression, I think, in the Joker, which almost, it's kind of culminated in his dance down the stairway, and then in the way that he's behaving on the show, for Murray Franklin show. Yeah. And it's almost like, what I was just thinking as you were talking about that, is it's almost as if that dancing is the Joker. Arthur Fleck is a guy who he's never had a happy thought in his life, and he's disconnected. He feels completely foreign and alien and disconnected and rejected by the world. So I mean, this is in lines of Kierkegaard or Hamlet or Jesus, like he's a but in a way he's kind of he's like a potential hero, and in that way he's kind of the opposite of Batman. So what I see happens is when he's dancing in the bathroom after that first time, he's been awkward. He couldn't dance before, and then all of a sudden he dances, but it's in a strange way, but it's beautiful though. Like it's fluid and it works, but it's odd, and his body's contorting in weird ways. Right. But yet it's almost as if he's found harmony finally. Through his actions he's found harmony, but it's not the kind of harmony that you'd want in a Christian narrative. It's not harmony through voluntary self-sacrifice and submission and bending the knee. It's harmony with whatever animus possession and whatever spiritual, he got into spiritual harmony with something, but it wasn't Christ.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of what I was saying, like in the Discord of like, so Joker's almost like sort of this, because you see it almost in his character, like he's sort of this, he has like almost no fat on his body. He's sort of like alienated from his own body, and it's sort of like that's what I kind of feel like modernity is pushing towards. It's like this profound alienation from being to, like, you know, to, like I was saying, Descartes, you know, like I think therefore I am. So it's like that, because I read who's that, Thomas Merton. He says that I think therefore I am is like, that is the pronouncement of an alienated being. That is somebody who like has to justify their existence through their, you know, logical presupposition, or, you know, like logical thinking versus.
Okay, where does Merton say that?
And you should contemplation, I think, or there's no man as an island. Can't remember one of the two.
Okay, because what is interesting is as I've been pondering all this stuff in modernity, so there's a couple interesting things. I think him being so emaciated and starved, and that being an example or a symbolic example of his disconnection in such a just simple way of just eating from the material world, as a play on modernity, is really interesting. And also, like, I agree that I think therefore I am. I don't know that Merton quote. I'm gonna have to find that or figure it out, or you'll have to send it to me. Yeah. But I've been thinking a lot. There's this player in my mind that I've been just beginning on reading, who's a French existentialist, Gabriel Marcel, who I think is phenomenal. And he talks a lot about, there's a couple terms he uses. He talks about objectifying thinking, where we're, which I think is like, it's almost a play on words to what living in your abstractions is. You're objectifying an abstraction, or you're trying to pretend this abstraction is a real thing when it's not. But I agree with you. I think that's what happened with Descartes in the epistemic shift, is it created the potential for people to live in abstraction. And I think where we're at with modernity, and even with someone like a Joker, is it's showing I think the Joker is showing the kind of nihilistic despair end of that thinking when it's played out in a disconnected, disembodied way. And ultimately, I think that's where it's tied into, even like, the Joker's a weird thing, because he goes into a, I don't know, I'd love your guys' thoughts on this. Like, what is significant in the film about him switching from suicide to hurting others? Because that's a Dostoevsky thing too. Like, hate, and Jordan Peterson talks about that. Hatred of mankind is somehow, I don't know, or mass shootings. Like, there's something about the spirit of a mass shooter or the Joker that is different than just, and worse, more twisted, more perverse than just taking one's own life. I mean, that's a kind of despair, but it's like there's something that's beyond despair in the Joker. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but.
So I would compare it to, in the initial scene when we're introduced to the Joker, he's a pansy in a sense, but I use that non-technically, right? The boys come and they steal his property, and they beat him over the head with it after a vicious joke. And he's laying on concrete. This is his concretization. This is what he has become. This is where his character has got him. What does he do in that moment? What's he do in his heart of hearts relating to the absolute? He touches his flower and squirts a little water out. That's an infinite gesture. It's on scale with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It really is, I would say. Because That's what he's motivated to do with those set of circumstances. Fast forward, without judgment, that's just what he does. Fast forward to, he's on the subway and he's crying. I mean, he's down and out, and some guys come to put a little salt in that wound. And he's not willing to salt the rim of his margarita and drink down despair with them. I mean, he could resign himself to that. Instead, he can't help, and this is where the dancing comes in, but laugh involuntarily to make the situation worse, or to draw out from the situation the revelation of the gun. And anytime there's a gun, it has to be used. And that's when he becomes an agent in some sense. He shoots the man. And why I say agent is, the second man starts running. If it was merely self-defense, he would have let him go. What does he do? He steps outside the subway, watches him. Mm-hmm. The guy doesn't leave because he's watching him. He stays in just before the door closes. The Joker goes back in. He's now hunting the man, taking part in the revenge tragedy. Now, that doesn't answer your question, but it is a stark contrast from pushing the little flower to get out a couple drops of dew. What has shifted in his soul to choose that route? I think it's a deepening of resignation, as opposed to when he was touching that flower, for all he knew, honey could have come out, gold itself, the world could have changed, because he was opening himself up to the infinity of, well, maybe the God of all possibilities will change my luck. But when he took that gun and stood outside the subway and waited, and then went back in and hunted, he became the one with the bow and arrow. I know the track. I know the scent. This has always worked. Primitivity.
Yeah, it's kind of like a closing up of possibility. Like he made the judgment that like when he decided to start hunting that kid, that was like the judgment of now I'm now, like I've shut myself out to or I've judged the world as bad, or as maybe not bad, but just like it was sort of like a taking into his own hands versus like you were saying, kind of still at least in like when with that flower, at least it was a small symbolic gesture, but it was still born out of like honest sincerity, maybe. I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
And that's fascinating too, because when you say symbolic, it's not like the flower, that water didn't flood anyone's house. It was such a small stream. It didn't make a wake in the culture. It didn't advocate for anything, but it was symbolic. But when he had the gun in his hand, he affected the culture. He said something to his neighbor, namely, go to hell. And then afterwards, worshipped himself, or worshipped whatever he worshipped, the animus, to your point, Luke. Whatever was surging through him and gave him that thrill.
Right.
It's almost as if I don't know, it's almost, and this is where, like, in my, when I was talking with Sam and Julian about the Joker, Julian it seemed like he was talking about how it was more of like a revenge thing, or a getting back. The Joker to me is almost, it's almost like beyond this. And this is a thought that I just had, is it's almost as if in a Christian scheme, in the Christian hero thing, in Christ, there's a way almost in which you become so selfless that you find yourself. But it's like, there was a line from a book that I've recently been reading for my book club, is this book Godric by Francis Buechner, who, there's a line in it where he's talking of a saint, the Saint Cuthbert, and he says, since holiness was all he knew, he didn't think much of his own. And it's almost like, and it's one of just those profound lines. And I feel like in a Christian sense, saintliness is almost like a complete emptying of the self, or I think of like this Gregor Nyssa quote, like it's the difference between being and having. Like you completely move from the realm of having to being, and so you're not even thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about anything that you possess, even yourself, your identity. You transcend that whole plane, and it's like Arthur Fleck has also done that, but in the opposite way. It's like he transcended himself. He's not. That's why he transcends ideology. Even like when Murray Franklin is saying, why are you doing this? You're trying to make a political statement. And he just laughs. He's just like, I'm so beyond politics. Like, you don't get this. I'm not trying to make a statement. There's no agenda. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm not trying to get revenge. I have so embraced broken disconnect, the opposite of truth and good and beauty. My whole life has been the opposite of that, and so I want everything to burn. And it's not burn me, burn everything. He doesn't even protect himself. Like violence, pain, doesn't matter. Nothing matters to him. That's why the Joker is such a terrifying thing. And I think back to even like Heath Ledger's Joker almost showed this more, or it was more clear, is pain didn't bother him at all. He wasn't concerned about avoiding pain. He didn't care. He would enter into it in service of his let the world burn.
Ooh, let me touch on that. That is so interesting because on the surface or by textbook, what a great way to beat addiction of any kind. To remove the threat of pain, for pain to lose its sting. I mean, that is like a cure-all for all addictions. The Joker, what's he addicted to? It's not glory. It's not it's not eloquence. It's not a person. Like, he's not in any kind of romantic relationship to speak of. I don't even think he's properly narcissistic.
No.
So he is how is he not the devil in a shining robe of light? In some sense, like you could look at him and almost model non-addictive behavior after him, except for everything he does.
I don't know. And part of it is like, I don't think that we, because of the good, the icon of Christ and the goodness that is still inherent within any human being that breathes, that literally has the breath of God. I don't think that we really, in a way, can almost understand evil, like true evil in the way that it is. And I think the Joker gets close. I was reminded of, there's so in Lewis's space trilogy, I'll bring Lewis's space trilogy, but in the second book, there's a person who, to a degree, and then eventually in a very real way, embodies the devil, more or less. And there's a point where the hero character, Ransom, is interacting with him. And he has some line, I wish I had it here to repeat it, but he was saying in his interactions with this character, the devil, because he's essentially trying to make the Eve character fall into sin. And so he and Ransom are having this quite literally cosmic battle back and forth for her soul. And so in his attempts to weaken her and to weaken Ransom, the things that he does are almost, I remember Lewis says they're almost childish. Like he couldn't believe it. Like it was very much along the lines of just like he would just stick his tongue out at him and just like make little noises like nah, 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 just little things that and I remember Lewis, there was a point in there, I'll have to find it and send you the text or something at some point, but it was almost more like he had never really thought about how true evil looked, and it was almost strangely childish in a way, or like just like picking, he would just pick the petals off a flower, just anything, any little thing to destroy beauty was just as good as anything else. it's almost as if it's kind of like I've heard, and I don't know who said this. Merton has said this. A lot of Christian mystics have said things like this, that like the whole universe and beauty and everything that you need to know is like is beheld in the face of a flower.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the devil knows that too. You know, like he'll just as easily degrade and destroy a flower as burn down a cathedral, you know, or murder someone. Like evil is evil. It's indiscriminate. You know, like it wants to destroy anything good. And it's almost like, I don't know, we have a hard time wrapping our head around that. I think that's why the Joker is really such a salient thing in the public consciousness right now, is like it's tapping into something, and it's evidencing something that's incredibly important. And I think that it's a, I don't know, I really do think it's a warning. So, and I mean, I guess we're losing silence in this, but I don't know what you guys said earlier. I'm sure it was profound and wonderful. But so what do you, that's a question I would love to have for you guys. Like so we do all this talking about Joker, and I think we all think that it's significant. So then what? How should we then live in light of Joker? What's it mean? What do we do? Rather than living in our abstractions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think part of the reason why at least ideologues hated Joker was because like you couldn't like Arthur Fleck was a real person in terms of like you and like Peugeot said this, you can't fit him into an easy box. And I think Kierkegaard said this somewhere, where it's like Christ was in some sense the only real person, in that like he didn't try to start a movement, he didn't try to start a revolution in like the way that we it is. Like he was himself, and he spoke the truth, and he was like he just existed in terms of he wasn't trying to like prove anything or start a revolution. So I think maybe part of the reason why I guess like what we can take from that is sort of goes back to faith, is like there's a lot of things in the world that like we're never going to be able to solve. We're never like we can't solve societal level problems.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the individual. I mean, like this is sort of Peterson type-esque, but also, I mean, ultimately it's fundamentally Christian. Is like you walk with God as best as you can, trusting him, and then like ultimately that's all you can do. So maybe it's kind of a warning in terms of like the dangers of this is what happens when we start to take things into our own hands.
Or trying to fix the world with our utopianism.
Right.
And I think this is where Christianity, I don't know, as you were talking, I don't know why you were saying this, but you were talking about what Christ did, and what kept popping into my head was the book of Hebrews, and that's why I was looking at my phone. I was trying to come up with this verse, and it's Hebrews 10 when he's talking about sacrifice and what was going on with sacrifice, and he says, Hebrews 10:5 says, "Therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, 'Sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me.'" And it's contrasting. So I'm thinking I'll try to, got like 10 threads. I'll try to articulate into intelligible language. So I'm thinking about Girard, and I'm thinking about a lot of what Paul has been talking on lately, that Christianity is about voluntary sacrifice instead of sacrificing the other. And Joker's kind of the opposite of that, right? Because it's just kill everything, stay alive so you can kill everything. And Christ is like, die so that everything may live. So so in Christ, in his death, in the seed that's planted in the earth, right? From that grows a tree that has the leaves in Revelation that's for the renewal of all things, right? And the mustard seed and the mustard plant. And what is that? In Revelation it says that, and its leaves will be for the, I don't know. I swear I don't know my Bible well enough. I could just be like, it's almost there. But its leaves will be for the renewal of all the nations or something like that. And so so I think that's what Christ did, is he mystically, in the sacrifice of his body, created a body, and he took his individual expression and made it universal. So he took the finite and made it universal, which, and in a weird paradoxical way, he was already, I mean, that's kind of what is that? Philippians 2, though Christ not counting equality God, something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking on the form of a servant. So he took the universal and made it particular. And then in his sacrifice, that particularity became universal. And it's, what I'm thinking of is, I don't know if you guys have watched this, but it's something about Peugeot said, and I was so pumped up with his talk about Vervaeke, just like everything Peugeot was saying. I was just like, yes, yes, yes. But he was saying at like 58 minutes in that talk, he said something like, the most important thing about Christianity is that the expression of the infinite is also infinite. Like, it's equally infinite, and there's something, and the way that I've always said this, I think this is what Peugeot is saying, and what I've tried to say is why art is so profound, and why, like, you can't label and minimize and box Arthur Fleck or any person, is that we are also infinite. There is universality in the particular. And this is why any sort of like dualistic, minimalistic, divorced frame can't ever work, and is always going to fall into some sort of reduction, simplification, ideology, coercion, and violence. Like, I think that's an inevitable pattern. And so it's almost like my takeaway, and I think it's really simple. Maybe it's as simple as like the flowers and plucking the leaves on the flower, is to help what Joker is about in the world is, and this bringing Jordan Peterson, is very much clean your room, but not even your own room. It's just like, love your neighbor, smile at the clerk when you go to the grocery store, pick up garbage on the street, hug a homeless person or something, like, maybe don't even give a homeless person money, invite them for a meal into your home. I mean, I think love, I think that's the answer. I mean, it's simple, but love is the universal tool, and it's a tool of the universal to transform the world from a Christian perspective, rather than hate and malice and resentment and resignation and violence. And so I don't know. I mean, and obviously there's infinite ways to express that in everybody's individual lives, but I don't know, repentance with your family. If you have something against your brother, go to them. Confession. I mean, all those sorts of things, I think, are the leaves of the renewal of the world. And I don't know, that's probably the biggest thing with my takeaway from Joker and all the talk and the abstractions and things, is that even in the Paul Vanderlei community, and I talk about this with people, I think the danger is like, this is super fun, to talk about these things. And somewhat for all the people that are in this world, it's relatively easy. Like, this is the stuff we like to do. These are people that love ideas and they're open. And I mean, this is just like, an old pastor he said, Luke, you like mind candy. And that's true. But it's a lot harder to love the unlovable. I mean, I guess that would be my takeaway of Joker. And it's probably the things that are closest to you that you most don't want to deal with, that you most don't want to see, you know, the cave you fear to enter, holds the treasure that you seek type stuff. So I don't know. I guess that would be my answer.
Yeah, I hate to have to cut it short, but I actually need to run. So since I'm
All right.
hosting this meeting, but
sorry for being late, guys. I gotta go. Yeah.
Maybe we.
It was a good note. It was a good note. At the end,
Yeah.
the leaves. That was a beautiful image, Luke. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt and Luke.
Yeah, it was good to talk to you guys.
I'll like stop this, and then I can send it to Jeff or whatever if he wants to put it up. I'm fine to post it. If you guys
I'm good.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. I'll see you.
Yep.
All right, bye.
God bless.
Thanks.